Anybody here for the first time? Okay, welcome. If some of the things sound a bit too jarring, I apologize. Because sometimes when we come to the end, we kind of make conclusions, but we've been talking about it all the while. Anyway, with these words, let's get on to the sequel of the search. I call it sequel because it appears that we had ended our search last evening, but we really did not. What we were doing at that time was comparing different claims. And then we felt that one was somewhat ahead than the others, and it seemed to be the only way. And that's why we put those words, the only way, yesterday at the bottom there. Now we do not want to compare. This evening, we're just going to look at this way, this man and this book, without any comparison with anybody else. Will this man and this book show us some qualities that can grip us? Are there features that will cause amazement just by looking at them? That's the question. But before that, let's go back to some of the things we had left undone in the previous comparison. Number one, you remember we had put up the so-called unique factors. These are factors or claims that a religion said was so unique to it, but when we looked at another religion, it also had them. So-called unique factors. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and another 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The point here is that these 5 religions, at least one of them, had said that these points were unique. In other words, they were extremely important to that religion. So if we want to make a generic religion out of the 5, we could possibly take all these 12 and make one generic religion. Because all these points, these 12, are important in a collective way to the 5 major religions we studied. And I'm going to just throw this out because you don't really have time to go through them one by one. Later on, if you meet me or if we do have a discussion, we can have a discussion on these 12 points. I will just throw this one sentence out. This generic religion, which has these 12 qualities which are collectively important to all the 5 religions, only Christianity has all 12. Now we go to the summary of the conclusions we made yesterday. And let us see if they are just some random points, or is there some method of consistency in these points. The first 3 are about the writings. It is the best documented ancient writing. It is also one of the writings that has a quality that really places it very high as its top feature. Most probably superhuman. Nobody has written a book for 1400 years. And also this, which is the best attested ancient piece of literature, is the only piece of literature that has thrown out a challenge for it to be tested. So in those 3 points, you see a certain consistency and a confidence within itself. That is what I looked at and I said, wow, it has amount of confidence in itself. And so it left the mark down through the ages for us to see even today. When it came to the founders, the first 3 questions to the founders was, this man Jesus, he made the highest claim. His claim was that he did not belong to our realm. He came down to our realm from the realm of the gods, from the realm of infinity. From there he came to us. Now if he came from there to us, bringing the message, then he would have brought the message, one of the ways would have been in himself. And that is why he said, I am. Every other founder said, I will show you the way, I will show you the truth. This person said, I am. It is consistent with his claim of having come from that realm to ours. If he came from that realm, bringing the message in himself, then we would expect him to have lived his whole life in line with that. And that's exactly what we see, and that's exactly what we see in the only life that we can scrutinize on earth that has met the conditions. So these three make a real good, consistent claim. From there he came, bringing the message in himself, and when he brought the message in himself, it worked out of his life to a perfection. The next three bring him down from that up level, high level, the pedestal, down to the lowest. He's the only founder born illegitimate. The only founder who had such a short ministry and who died the worst death. So, the worst start in life, the shortest period of ministry, and the worst ending in life. So from the heights, he goes down to the depths. Then how come there is Christianity today? It's because of the 10th one. The only one who went into the domain of death, conquered it, and came back, and left us enough evidence for us to scrutinize as an honest, fair enquirer, and come to the conclusion that he really did it. So these 10 really are a consistent set, which tells us that they're not just random claims. They are consistent with themselves and give us an idea that what we are dealing with possibly should appeal to our intellect and our imagination. Now we go to the book and the man. Jesus is not one of the group of the world's great. Talk of Alexander the Great and Charles the Great and Napoleon the Great, if you will. Jesus is apart. He is not the great. He is the only. This is the words of Carnegie Simpson. Why would he write such words like that? That was my question. I mean, can't he just write it ordinarily and say he is really very great? Why would he use these superlative descriptions? And that is our scrutiny this evening. When we look at him, apart from trying to compare him to anyone else, are there features there that are amazing? Number one, his unique entrance into history. His mother conceived him while she was yet a virgin. He had no paternal father. The virgin conception, birth of Christ, is utterly unique in human history. The question to me was not whether it really took place. That was not my primary question. Why was it prophesied? 600 years before he was born, Isaiah wrote and said that a virgin would conceive and a virgin would be pregnant and still remain a virgin. Do you think anybody in his right mind would make such a prediction? Such a physiologically ridiculous prediction? How do you think in his mind he would have thought it would be fulfilled at all? And yet he made it. And looking down through history, there is only one serious claimant for its fulfillment, and that is the birth of Jesus. There is nobody else who has said that that's the way it would happen. My question is again, how come he made that prediction? Something was there. In fact, when he made the prediction, he said this would be a sign. It would be a supernatural sign. And therefore, when we look at history and find only one of a kind, I think as an honest inquirer, we should accept that as a supernatural sign. What use would it be to tell you that the marker along this road where you should turn is marked by a green tree when every tree is green? You've got to have something that is very different as a sign. And a virgin getting pregnant and remaining a virgin can be such a supernatural sign. It was predicted, behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, call his name Emmanuel. The virgin is pregnant, and despite the pregnancy, the mother is still considered to be a virgin. Number two, his unique sinless perfection. We saw that yesterday. 15 million minutes of life on this earth in the midst of a wicked and corrupt generation. Every thought, every deed, every purpose, every work, privately and publicly, from the time he opened his baby eyes until he expired on the cross, were all approved of God. Never once did our Lord have to confess any sin, for he had no sin. Christ's self-conscious purity is astonishing. He and he alone carried the spotless purity of childhood untarnished through his youth and manhood. He remains the highest model of religion within the reach of our thoughts, and no perfect piety is possible without his presence in the heart. David Strauss was one of the persons who criticized Christianity all his life. His writings and his speeches were of the kind that destroyed faith in Christ through the years of his life. But towards the end, when he re-examined what he had said all along and re-examined the life that had been lived for 33 years on this earth, this was what he had said. Sinless perfection and perfect sinlessness is what we would expect of God incarnate, and this we do find in Jesus Christ. The hypothesis and the facts concur. Miracles. Jesus' miracles were seen by eyewitnesses and reported and recorded in the same generation they were performed. No other miracle has been so recorded in ancient history. Number two, he himself performed the miracles unlike Muhammad or Moses. Even Muhammad, when he came down, he said, well, the angel spoke to me. The angel did the miracle. When Moses stood with his rod over the Red Sea, he told the children of Israel beside him, he said, look, wait and see how the Lord does it. He himself could not do it. None of the others ever claimed that the miracles were done by themselves. They claimed that it was done by God, except for this man. And then miracles are believed in non-Christian religions because the religion is already believed. But in the biblical religion, miracles are a part of the means of establishing the true religion. This distinction is of immense importance. It was a miracle authenticating the religion at every point. He kept on telling them, if you don't believe my words, at least believe what you are seeing before your eyes. Greatest words. After reading the doctrines of Plato, Socrates, or Aristotle, we feel the specific difference between their words and Christ is the difference between an inquiry and a revelation. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. These are the words of Jesus regarding his own statements. Never did the speaker seem to stand more utterly alone than when he uttered this majestic utterance. Never did it seem more improbable that it should be fulfilled. But as we look across the centuries, we see how it has been realized. They have never passed away. 2,000 years later, they are still around. They have never passed away. What human teacher ever dared to claim an eternity for his words? Lasting influence. That ministry of Jesus lasted only 3 years, and yet in these 3 years is condensed the deepest meaning of the history of religion. No great life after its close excited such universal and lasting interest. As the centuries pass, the evidence is accumulating that Jesus, by his effect on history, Jesus is the most influential life ever lived on this planet. If you look at how his influence has gone into commerce, into literature, into religion, into the whole idea of spirituality, those words really come alive. He addressed deep needs. If any thirsts, let him come to me and drink. Come to me all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. All his teachings, all his miracles were aimed at alleviating something that was distressing somebody else, never for show. What can be more basic than thirst? What can be more welcome Then rest when you are tired. How many of us have been tired of life so many times? And those are the points he addressed constantly. He was not worried about those who were watching him. He was worried about the one who he was confronting. And right there, he would delve into the deepest parts of that individual and address their need. And it was so universal that he could say, if anyone thirsts, and if you are tired, come to me. He addressed the naked heart of man and touched the quick of the conscience. And then the seventh one we saw yesterday, he conquered death. At this point, he parts ways with every other founder of every religion on earth. He predicted it. When they came to him and, they were upset, some of the people around him, and said, what kind of authority do you have? You are just a peasant. He turned around and said, there's only one point of authority. Kill me, I will rise again. That's my authority. Now think of it. Will you say that to anyone as your authority? Will anybody on earth say that to anybody else as their authority? Only a fool would say that. Kill me and I'll rise again, and that is my authority. Well, you kill him and he's gone. Unless he meant what he said. And so these seven, unique entrance into history, unique sinless perfection, performing miracles which was open and public, spoke the greatest words, has the most lasting influence, and addressed the deep needs in your heart and mind, and then goes into death, conquers it, and comes back and says, I've got the keys in my hand. It definitely is unique as far as the characteristics in one individual. How about the book? Is the book unique? The way it was written, for instance, amazingly written. Different generations, authors, places, times, moods, styles, continents, and languages. We're going to go through each of them one by one. First author was Moses around 1400 BC, and the last author was John around 100 AD. The writing was approximately 1400 years. Different ages it was written in. Different authors, 40 authors. For instance, Moses was educated, judge, leader. Joshua was a military general. David a shepherd as well as a king. Daniel was a prime minister. Amos was a herdsman. Luke a physician and historian. Matthew a tax collector. Peter a fisherman. Paul a Jewish rabbi. Mark was a personal attendant. Different circumstances in which they wrote it. Moses traveling as a head of the nomad. Jeremiah was punished and in a dungeon. Daniel in a peaceful home, palace. Paul in various towns, free as well as imprisoned. David in fugitive in a wild country. Luke on extensive travels. John in lonely exile, in different times and moods. Moses as an undisputed leader. David as an outlaw and king. Solomon in prosperity as well as in dejection. Daniel peaceful as well as perplexed. Jeremiah in deep grief and bitterness. Isaiah in solid conviction and hope. Luke in exactness and detail. Paul in sternness and tenderness. Different literary styles in this book. Storytelling like Genesis, historical like Chronicles, poetry and song like the Psalms, romance like Song of Solomon and Ruth, didactic like in Proverbs, personal letters like Paul's epistles, biography like Luke, autobiography like Ezekiel, code of law like the Torah, prophetic like Isaiah and Daniel, parables like the Gospel, symbolism like in Revelation. Different continents. This is one book that was written on 3 continents: Asia, Africa, Europe. Different languages. The Old Testament was mainly in Hebrew, and some parts of it were Aramaic. The New Testament is mainly Greek and some parts of Aramaic. So 3 languages. Different generations, different authors, different places, different times, different literary styles, different continents, different languages. One word that is common to all those points is the word different. And yet this next point is amazing harmony. One single source, one story, one lead character. written about by 40 different authors of us over a span of 1400 years. Let's choose 10 people today. Say the Prime Minister of Australia, one of the captains in your army, a school teacher, a businessman, a scientist, and tell them, write whatever you feel deeply moved to write. Just choose 10. Choose 10 of this generation. And let us see if those 10, writing by themselves, can write one story, one theme, one lead hero. What are the chances? Can you see what has been happening here? If there's one lead character that the source has seen and written about for 1400 years, any honest inquirer should be amazed. Amazing influence. Since the dawn of civilization, no book has inspired as much creative endeavor among writers. No other book in all human history has in turn inspired the writing of so many books as the Bible. Civilization has been influenced more by the Judeo-Christian scriptures than by any other book or series of books in the world. Amazing preservation. Jews preserved it as no other manuscript has ever been preserved. Do you know that they kept tabs on every letter, syllable, word, and paragraph? They would count the first, the middle, the last word of maybe a page or of a paragraph, and if the copied version was any different, and if the middle word was not in line with the middle word of the one that was copied by, they just destroyed the whole, what they had done, and they were destroyed many. Some of them have been found, the destroyed versions. And that's how we realize that their copying was really exact. Whoever counted the letters and syllables and words of Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, and Seneca? For 2,300 to 3,900 years, the text of proper names has been transmitted with the most minute accuracy, a phenomenon unequaled in the history of literature. It may safely be said that no other work of antiquity has been so accurately transmitted. How many times we hear of people saying, we don't know. The story was here and it's a little different here, but how do we know whether the real thing was brought to us finally? What we have in our hands is the real thing. If you question this book, you have to question every other work of antiquity. Amazing survival. The only book to be repeatedly banished and attempted to be destroyed completely. And when I went through history on that point, I stopped and I asked myself, why? Have you ever thought of that? Why should this book be destroyed completely? Why not let it be like the other books? No. This book should be destroyed completely. No other book has been so chopped, knifed, sifted, scrutinized, and vilified, and had been subject to such a mass attack as the Bible, with such venom and skepticism upon every chapter, line, and tenet, and it has still not stopped even till today. Always attacked from every possible angle. But it still survives, still there today. A good example of how it survived predictions is the prediction of Voltaire. He was a French thinker and a philosopher, brilliant guy. A few centuries ago, he said that this book and the whole meaning of this book, which meant Christianity, would be wiped off within 75 years. That's what his prediction was, and people believed that because he was so brilliant in the way he was thinking. He seemed to know everything. 50 years after he died, there was a society that bought his house and brought some printing presses into his basement, and that society was the Geneva Bible Society. and printed Bibles in his basement 50 years after he died. Emperors and popes, kings and priests, princes and rulers have all tried their hand at it. They die. The book still lives. And you and I are witnesses to that even today because it is still around. Amazing circulation. When you reach about 100,000 books sold, you become a bestseller. And boy, you celebrate. You sell 1 million and you can write home about it. 10 million and you are known the world over. So when you see a book that is going to tens of millions, you know that something really big is happening here. I do not have the statistics of all the years, but the United Bible Society of 1998, that's 10 years ago, gave us this statistic. Its distribution report, the total distribution of copies of the Bible or portions thereof in 1998 reached a staggering 585 million. No wows. Look, this is an ancient book, an ancient manuscript book. It is not a red-hot novel. It is not a science fiction. It is not some kind of miracle cure for cancer that was found. Why should this book have 585 million sold out and distributed? Doesn't that raise a question? And doesn't that make you think that there's something big and great going on? Amazing translation. Do you know how many languages the UN has kind of counted on the face of this earth? About 6,000. By the time you reach about 500 or 600, you have covered almost all the population on earth. The rest of those languages are just small pockets here and there. Now there are societies that are doing a translation of this book, the Bible. They are doing it, today they have about 800 translators right now working on 450 new translations. That means translation into new languages that has never been translated before. Where we are today, and at this rate, do you know something? You and I might be witnesses to the world's first universally translated text. No other piece of writing is anywhere near there. We are less than a generation away from witnessing the world's first universally translated text. No other book in history comes close. Most of the other translations, look, if you're an author and you translate it into 2 or 3 languages, boy, you'll feel good about it. And if it is translated into 10 or 15 languages, you've made the headlines. This book, of all the books on earth, is heading towards that point which no other book even dares to try to compete. No other book is anywhere close by. But we are less than a generation away. So, it's amazingly written, has a tremendous harmony, influence, preservation, survival, circulation, and translation. I cannot see any other writing on earth that can equal this set. So the conclusions, this man in the book, this is my stand, that's my search that I made. And like I said yesterday, I'm not telling you to make a stand on the points that I have written down. But it is reasonable to make a stand when you are faced with the evidence that we are faced with, all the facts that we went through these last 3 days and today as well. Let's take a break. We're going to change gears. All this while and all these hours that we have been together, we have tried to gather information, evidence, in kind of a cold, calculating way, trying to use reason and logic and just putting the facts together. These things appeal to the intellect that wants to place argument and argument side by side. I think it is time then, after you have done that, to ask whether the intellect can also be summoned to a point where it will bow to emotions as well. Because if there is a God, like we said there might be in the first session, and if He created you and made us up, then when I look into myself, I see not only an intellect that wants to reason out, but I also see a lot of feelings, emotions. And if you did hear the interview this morning on the radio, there was the question, how shall we shift from knowledge to experience? How shall we shift from head to heart? And I think I'm going to just shift gears now. We have laid a certain foundation, at least we've attempted to do that. So if you will give me permission, I am going to speak as if the book is valid and this man has told the truth. And so from that perspective, I'm going to make the book and the man the reference point and speak as if that's the truth. Because all this while we were trying to establish that, and now we are shifting out to see if that is the truth. Is there something in that place that can also grip the imagination and my heart, not just my head? The reason I came to that was a question that naturally came up in my mind on the 9th point in the previous scrutiny. And the 9th point was, what happened at his death? He died the most horrible death. The question that came up to my mind was, we had earlier seen that he was the most innocent. So why did the most innocent die the most horrible death? He claimed to come from a level that was supernatural. Then my question was, did supernatural justice go bad? Did ultimate justice just break down? Why should the most innocent die the most horrible death? If you attempt to answer that, I believe it will take you to the core of the teachings of this man. And in that core teachings, I have found that nobody is left out. Everybody is on stage. There are no spectators. The story has all of us as the original cast in that. Everyone from the beginning of this world's history, right up to the end, wherever it is involved. So here is a part of that story. First, when you look at that, we must establish what we mean by certain words. And so here are some definitions. What is righteousness? The big word. People use it, and it really means doing things correctly. And the first thing that comes to our mind for doing things correctly is a set of rules. If the set of rules is here, then if you do it according to the rules, then it's correct. But the message here is it goes much deeper than rules. It's a very simple and yet very deep, simple principle. Righteousness is saying, you first, not me. That's it. Similarly, unrighteousness or badness is not necessarily doing some things nasty or bad. It is just saying me first, not you. And it is simple. But you will see when we are finished, it runs the deepest. Justice, punishment that is equal to the crime by a law. And when we look at those words, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, sometimes we think that it is so barbaric and primitive. But do you know that is the highest form of justice? If I stole $10 from you, how much should I give back? Exactly 10. That is justice. If I give anything less than 10, it's not justice. If I broke somebody's window and it cost $20 to fix, then somebody has to pay $20. So that is justice. Mercy, we often think of mercy as, okay, you owe me 10 for that, but 5 will do. But if you do that, you have knocked off justice. And if you do that, somebody else has paid the other 5, sometime or the other. So if you really want to show mercy and retain justice, then we have to recognize that mercy will never be able to touch the law or the punishment. But it can come in at a certain specific point. If justice is satisfied once the axe falls, mercy allows it to fall elsewhere. Justice as a cannon will fire, mercy can direct the cannon's fire. It cannot stop the cannon from firing. If it stops the cannon from firing, it is destroying justice. And therefore mercy, if it must come in, must retain justice. Otherwise, it will be arbitrary, and when there is arbitrariness, there is neither justice nor mercy. So those are the concepts I'd like for us to remember. The other is the word heaven, or nirvana, or the ultimate, paradise. There are many descriptions of heaven and paradise, and all those descriptions are, beautiful and gold and abundance of food and pleasures. Do you know why they are written in that way? Because they should appeal to us. And our minds have been warped. We have run away from the true value of existence. And the true value of existence is not in things. The true value of existence is in a heart-to-heart relationships that you can form. Nothing can equal that. Not the diamonds in the world can ever take the place of a lover. No. Because a relationship is the most valuable. We have forgotten that. And that is why it is written that heaven is a place where there is gold and all kinds of things. Heaven is not gold. Heaven is where you have a heart-to-heart relationship with the one who lives there, that is God. That is heaven. Of course there's gold and abundance and all that. But that is not what makes it heaven. What makes it heaven is when there's a heart-to-heart relationship. And when there's a heart-to-heart relationship between two people here on earth, then it's heaven on earth. And when there's a heart-to-heart relationship between a person here and God, then it's heaven. And when there's a heart-to-heart relationship in the heavenly realm itself among those up there in that realm, then it is even better than heaven, our concept of heaven. Similarly, hell is not necessarily where the fire burns and then you get scalded skin and feel the heat. Hell is not heat. Otherwise, many of us have been going through hell. Hell is when there is a broken relationship. And when the relationship between man and God is finally broken, that will be hell. When it's between a human and a human who have fought viciously and turned away, it's hell on earth. Between human and God, broken, That's hell. When it's up there between those who live in the spheres of eternity, when there, if anything breaks, it is worse than hell. Those are the definitions we look at. Death, the Bible talks of two types. Number one, sleep, temporary, and its consequence. It's not a punishment. Everybody dies, whether you're good, bad, ugly, doesn't matter. Number two is what is called lake of fire or permanence, a punishment for those, at least that's what is described, for those who deliberately stay on and make an ultimate, complete, final choice. Nobody is going to hell just because you make mistakes. It depends on the ultimate choice that you make. There is also these words in the Bible called suffering of death. Suffering can occur when you are alive. Not when you're dead. When you're dead, it's gone. There's no feeling there. But when you're alive, the suffering of death is the impending doom, the sinking feeling that you feel when the relationship is going to be completely and permanently broken off with no chance of recovery. It's gone. The impending doom, that is the suffering of death. With those words, let's get on with the story. We will pick it up in a garden. It's Thursday night in a garden. This man goes with his disciples to the garden, and he is staggering because there seems to be a load on his shoulders that he is unable to bear. And by the time he reaches the garden, he is almost on his knees. He tells his disciples, stay here, and he walks a few steps there and simply falls to the ground. And from those pale lips comes these words, please, I cannot bear it anymore. Stop it. My Father, stop it. Can I find any other way? Can you do something else, not this? What is happening? Was he being a wimp, a coward, standing strong in front of the people, and now is getting a little uncomfortable, running away from his known duty? Compare what he was saying with some of the others who have been called to such similar circumstances. There was a person called Hus, a Bohemian, who was taken to the stake to be burned alive because he was called a heretic. When he was being burned, they put the faggots, the wood around him, and it was customary that the person who lighted the fire came and lighted it at the back. That was the custom. As the person came with a torch, burning torch, he called out to him and he said, don't light the fire behind my back. Come to my face and in front of me light the fire, because if I was afraid, I would not even be here. How about the maidens and the children in the Colosseums of Rome in 1st century? Some of them were thrown to the lions and to the other wild beasts. And when they were thrown there, at the signal, they could hear the gates opening from where these lions and these ravenous beasts would come bounding across the arena and tear them to pieces. Just before they would do that, they would huddle together in a little circle, hold hands, and sing. Sing songs. Seconds before their death. Why was Jesus not willing to sing a song? Why was he crying out like this? I believe we need to get into the story. What was it that was really happening there? You know, Mel Gibson in his movie, The Passion of the Christ. Anybody seen that? Passion of the Christ. Some people have seen that. And some people say it is gory. I've seen it. Yeah, it is gory. But if you go back to the actual descriptions of crucifixion, they're worse. He really got some points out there. He showed some things that happened. And some of the things were these. And I'll list them, 3 of them out, but we'll take a break. Number 1. He showed that there was hate involved. In history, there are very few nations that hate another nation with that intensity, as the Jews hated the Romans and the Romans hated the Jews. And yet when it came to this person, they joined together and poured their combined hatred on him. They hated me without cause, says the scriptures. And if you read and if you watch the film, you would have got that. Because they did it with such intensity. There was also shame. He endured the cross, despising the shame. We hinted at it, and I suppose we mentioned it also during the course of our seminar. It is the artists that paint a loincloth around the middle of a person who is crucified. I think they just do it to be decent. But when it comes to actually crucifying an individual, the Romans made sure that they were stripped completely naked. And together with that was the Jewish concept that anybody who was put to hang to death as the punishment, that person was cursed by God. There could be no greater shame than that to be heaped on any individual. And so there was hate, there was shame. There was also physical suffering because they took him to a place called Calvary where they crucified him. We do not see crucifixions today. Crucifixions begin with a flogging. And they flog in such a way that they remove chunks of skin and flesh from the back. And if you do it too intently, the pain is so severe that you will pass out. But these Roman soldiers were absolutely well trained in flogging. They would flog just enough to cause the maximum intensity of pain and not have you pass out. Because if you pass out, you're not going to feel the pain and it's no fun for them at all. They were absolutely well trained in that. 39 stripes, 2 times. And then take you out. Carry the cross onto your own back that was lashed just now, all the way up the hill, and then dig a hole there, put spikes through your palms or wrists and your feet, and then lift the cross up and boom, put it down into the ground. What happens when you do that, as soon as you do that, it's a very funny position in which your hands are, as it is when you put it onto the cross. When you lift it up and thrust it into the ground, your shoulders dislocate, both the shoulders. And there you are hanging, pierced through hand, shoulders dislocated, and you begin to suffocate because the whole weight now gets onto your neck. And you can't really push your legs up because the moment you do that, the pain of the nails. And so you, little by little, you suffocate. And as the blood supply and the oxygen gets less and less into your brains, you lose your mind and you scream and shout and curse God and man. That's how you finally die. There was terrible physical suffering. And people look at the cross and they say, look at the cross, the crucifixion, the nails, the thorns on his brow, and the spear in his side, and say, that is the story of the cross. No, my friends. none of those things ever bought anybody's freedom or salvation. Then what did? What is the story then of the cross? The story of the cross is not the story of the wooden cross. The story of the cross is actually relationships. And for that we have to go back to ask what happened in the beginning. Way before, that's what the book says, way before this world was even formed, God got together, it's called the Godhead, and said, we will create a world in which human beings would live. And if ever they walk off the path, they would have sinned, and the sin requires death. We will bring them back, every one of them, by paying the price ourselves. That was the oath that they made. And in the fulfillment of that oath, when it finally did happen, the first pair did go ahead and listen and disobey God and brought in the principle of unrighteousness into this world and into our lives, then one of them had to come down as a human. And that was the one called Jesus. Earlier called probably the Son of God, we don't know. But today at least we call him the Son of God. He came down, became a human. Now if you become a human, do you stop being God? No, you don't stop being God. You just put away the prerogatives of God and now live like a human. But if he took up humanity, we already know that humanity had failed because Adam and Eve had failed. So how was he going to live? This is how he was supposed to live. Lay aside his divinity and deity, take on humanity that had fallen, but don't live by that humanity. Leave aside its clamors, leave aside its hooks, and ask God to supply his life minute by minute, so that he could live a life that is not by the humanity that had fallen, neither by the divinity that he had as a possession. And that's why he said, I can of myself do how much? Nothing. Nothing he could do of himself. He had to be dependent totally on his Father to supply everything that he needed. In fact, these are his other words regarding that. He said, the Father who sent me gave me a command what I should say and what I should speak. Every parable, every teaching, every miracle he did was by the express permission and by the power of his Father. Never anything by himself. And in turn, his Father was the never-failing, dependable, unfaltering source of everything he needed. Nobody could fool him or trip him up. Nobody could make him jealous or hateful as long as he had that contact with his Father. Nobody could even touch him because his Father protected him. People tried. The story is there that people tried. If you remember, at his birth, Herod sent off a proclamation that he be killed somehow, escaped. And right through his life, there were many times when they wanted to kill him. He would say, my hour has not yet come. And then something changed on that Thursday night. He began to say that this is your hour in the power of darkness. For this purpose I came to this hour. And he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. My soul is exceedingly sorrowful even unto death. And his sweat became like great drops of blood falling to the ground. What is happening here? Simply put, this person who was earlier called the Lion of Judah, who could stand before the people and make high-sounding proclamations, was now changing gears. Now he was no longer the Lion of Judah, but now he was going to be the submissive Lamb of God. And we take the picture of the Lamb from the sacrificial system of the Jews. He was a Jew. It was called the Lamb of God. We look at what happened to the lamb that was brought to the temple. The first requirement of the lamb was that it accept and bear the mistakes, the sins and blunders of the person who brought it. And so when he became the Lamb of God, on him who had never known the experience of sin was laid the sins and blunders and mistakes of every single person on earth, beginning from the dawn of history till the last one who will ever live. And many people think it was like a cloak maybe placed on him, or like a big load on his head or shoulders, or something on his arms that he could, walk around with. That was the load of sin, like they say, on him. Well, the record is even more shocking. He did not just carry our sin, for he, God, made him, Jesus, who knew no sin, to be sin for us. He did not just carry our sins, he became the repository of sin in himself. That's where he was, that's where he went down to. And because sin, full-blown sin, which is unrighteousness, which is a diametrically opposite direction of movement and of thinking, and God and his righteousness are exactly the opposite, they cannot live together. He was delivered up because of our offenses. Delivered up to what? To the Jews? No. To the priests? No. To Pilate? Roman soldiers? No. He was delivered up to the full and final punishment of sin. The book describes it as death. The book describes it as going away and a complete separation from God. Who alone can do that? The Roman soldiers can do that? If we really think that it is the cross and the nails and the spear that bought our salvation, then in effect we are saying that the Roman soldiers, Pilate, the Jewish priests, all got together and made a pact with God to buy salvation, along with Satan in the middle of it. But that cannot be. Satan and God were at loggerhead. They were not doing the same thing. It's only God who can do it. Why? Can Australia punish for driving on the left side of the road? No. And I'm talking about a law made here. Now Australia, like India, my original country, we drive on the left side of the road. When you go to America, where I am now living, you drive on the right side of the road. Australia will punish if you drive on the right side of the road, because Australia's law says you must drive on the left side. And if you drive on the right side of the road, America will not punish you, because America's rule is that you drive on the right side of the road. Only the author of the law can punish when the law is broken. And that's why we read these words in Isaiah 53. We esteemed him, Jesus, stricken, smitten by God. The one who was dealing with him on the cross was not the Roman soldiers or not Pilate or the chief priest. It was God who was dealing with him on the cross, because he was dealing with sin. So what really happened? He began to deal with him. God and full-blown sin cannot exist. And so the separation began to take place. Remember, the greatest thing on earth, the greatest possession, is a heart-to-heart relationship. When that begins to be broken, you are facing hell. It began in Gethsemane that evening. Little by little it was getting worse and worse. And he loathed it from the depths of his being. And that is why we pictured him, the story says, he was clinging to the hard earth there, as if to say, don't drag me away from my Father. That is what he was feeling. And that is the fundamental singular difference between Jesus and Hus, that reformer, and the maidens in the Colosseums of Rome. Because God was with Hus. God was with the maidens and the children. When God is by your side, no matter what you face, you can still sing. When He moves away, nobody can sing, not even the Son of God, because the source of the song has gone. And so we see that it was moving away. Sometime along those hours between Gethsemane and Calvary, his Father fell silent. Now we just described that his Father was the all-sufficient answer to everything that he needed on earth. And now as his Father falls silent, he wants some word of assurance. It's as if he turns to his Father and says, will I make it through this hour? Silence. Look, Father, Dad, it was on your word I told all of them I would rise up the third day. Will I really rise? Silence. Give me one word now. Because I need to know, if I'm going through this, will I make it to the end? Silence. And as the thought comes into his mind in a crashing manner that this was what was really the sentence of God against sin, which he had voluntarily taken upon himself. This was a judgment to which there could be no repeal. This was a one-way street that was marked no return. There was wrung from those pale, parched, quivering lips the bitterest cry that anybody will ever hear in your existence. Eloi, Eloi lama sabachthani. My God, have you forsaken me? Where are you now when I need you the most? Silence. This is the cry of the heart that has been abandoned completely. When the break has been total, when the cannon of justice has pointed to you and there is no mercy to turn it away. This is the cry of the heart sinking into hell itself. That is the price that was paid. No crown of thorns, no burning sulfur, no spear in the side, no spikes into the palm or the wrists or the hands or the feet can ever equal the pain of a relationship that is just torn apart like this. This is the cross. We stopped at the place where we saw him without an answer from his Father, recognizing that this was the act of a righteous God against sin. And since he had taken it upon himself, he must suffer the consequences. In fact, on that Friday, hanging on the cross, when we look at what the events were that brought him there, we will have to make a very simple conclusion that on that day, the entire human race was potentially cleaned, and everything that was unacceptable to God was taken in one life choking heap and put onto him, and he bore it. In fact, he could not bear it. And that's why he cried out, "Have you forsaken me?" And he died in 8 hours, where normally it takes 3 to 7 days to die on a cross. He did not die of crucifixion. He died of a broken heart from the grief of having been separated from his Father. That was the price he paid. And in the midst of that superhuman agony, which no nail or thorn or spear can ever match, came one flinging temptation. The people were around him, the priests and the others, and they said, "Wow, you said you were the Son of God. Let's make a deal. If you are really the Son of God, then you come down from the cross and we will believe you that you are the Son of God." They were asking for a miracle so that they would believe. And they were disbelieving in the face of the greatest miracle. For which is greater? The ability to come down if you could? Or the choice to stay dangling there in pain and in torturous agony out of sheer love? Which is the greater miracle? Sometimes we must ask the right questions. He went on with it. It was a deliberate choice that he made. But who was he dying for anyway? His own nation had kicked him out. His own community had said they didn't want him and rejected him. The leaders of his own nation had plotted, gone to the Romans and said, "Let's put him to death." All his disciples had fled. One of the disciples had betrayed him, and one of the closest disciples had denied him with cursing and swearing. Who was he dying for? How dark the prospect of making an ultimate sacrifice for nothing at all. And yet he went on. Ultimately, the cross is a choice. It is just like coming to crossroads. That was the words, crossroads. When you come to a crossroad, you'd have to decide this way, that way, front or back. Ultimately, the cross as a story and as a meaning is not the thorns, not the spear, not the nails, not that wooden instrument of torture. Ultimately, the cross was a choice. A single, simple, piercing, ruthless choice. Save yourself or save this world of blundering wretches like you and me. How hard was that choice? How hard is it to make a choice? He is the Prince of Heaven, the commander of all the angels. And consider you and me, wretches, self-seeking, selfish, corrupt individuals. How hard is it to make the choice? How easy to say, "Hey, this is the choice I'm making." But the choice had to be made on a basis that we don't fully understand. Because righteousness and love, like sin and evil, have no explanation. Sin with a reason is not sin anymore. Love with a reason is not love anymore. Love loves when there is no reason to love. Love remains when every other type of relationship has gone, because every other relationship needs a reason. Love had no reason to be there in the first place, so it can find no reason to leave. Are you with me? And that is what we see, because that is what was portrayed, and that was what was acted out on the cross. And in that making of the choice, I wonder if we can imagine in our minds a person making up his mind. What could have swayed his mind then? There was only one factor. Figuratively, I will say it. He saw your face and mine. 2,000 years later, he saw us, bruised and battered in life, woeful and weak, slipping down a slippery slope, straight to perdition and hell. And there welled up in his heart a wondrous compassion, so deep and broad that he forgot about himself. He made up his mind. And what did we say was the definition of righteousness? You first, not me. And in the most brilliant demonstration of righteousness, this man, dangling on an instrument of torture, ready to die, turned to you and me and said, you first, not me. And he turned to his father and said, if there's any chance, give it to them. As for me, goodbye. And somewhere along the hours, as he hung on the cross, his father cut himself off from his son completely in an act of consummate justice against sin. And with the hiding of the father's face went the hope of resurrection. He could not see beyond the tomb. He died on that day with you and me on his mind, not himself. This is love. This is love in which it's not fuzzy feelings. It is the total and complete self-abnegation, which is the foundation of love. It's the foundation of this man's kingdom. He lives there. He does nothing for himself. He will never do anything for himself. If there is anything he has to do, it will be with you and me on his mind first. That is his oath, signed by his own blood. That's the way he died. And to you and me today, if we honestly look at that, I think we will step back and with our eyes and our hearts in wonder look at the cross and say, what wondrous love is this, O my soul? What wondrous love. It is not a warm fuzzy feeling. It is a choice that runs deep when you make a choice of love. But come the third day, he rose up. How and why? He belonged to the realm of the gods, to the eternal realm, to the realm of infinity. Even a small insult to him would translate to infinite insult. Even a small amount of pain would translate to infinite pain. A small amount of humiliation would translate to infinite humiliation. Because he lived in the realm of God. He was God. He never stopped being that. And therefore, when you look at the horrendous sacrifice and suffering that he went through in Gethsemane and the cross, we recognize that it was infinite suffering. And therefore, he, God, shall see the travail of his, Jesus' soul and be satisfied. In other words, every mistake, blunder, sin that anybody has committed from the first person on earth to the last person who ever lived was completely paid for by that one eternal sacrifice that Jesus made with the death on the cross. It was completely paid for, completely covered. Justice had been done because no amount of finite sins are greater than an infinite suffering of death, because he suffered death. And like we said, the death was the impending doom of complete separation. So he rose because he himself had done nothing wrong. It was our sins, our mistake that he was voluntarily taking upon himself. He himself had done nothing wrong. Justice would still be maintained if he was raised up. And so he was allowed to rise up from the grave. And when he did, he rose up with life that was his original life, his own, but with an eternal difference. Because at the point of the cross, he had actually sacrificed it. He had given it up. And so when it came back to him now, he could not possess it all by himself. Before the cross, he was the only begotten Son of God. After the cross, he might be the firstborn among many brethren. Who are these brethren? Siblings. Whosoever believes. And the word whosoever takes in every human being from the beginning to the end. Nobody is left out. Whosoever believes can become a brethren, sharing the very life that he had forfeited, which he took back, but this time to share with the others. And so, both he who sanctifies Jesus and God, and those who are being sanctified, you and me, are all of one. One what? One blood, one stock, one family. Because that is the life he gifts to us. For which reason he is not ashamed to call them brethren. It is a life that is the life of deity that is offered to humans on earth. That is the plan that he made and that he executed. Go to my brethren, he said after he rose up from the dead. Go to my brethren and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, because I am your brother. Way back when Abraham asked God, how will you show me these things will happen? God said, I will give you an oath, a promise. And in the 15th chapter of Genesis, the oath is described. Take an animal, and in that instance it was 3, cut them in 2, and lay them side by side. And then in an act that God showed him, he said, I will walk with you through those pieces and to the other side. Do you know what the meaning of that is? In that culture, if a person had possession of land for which he was supposed to pay, or it was his own, and he became so poor that he had to sell off that piece of land, and then the people around him realized that, man, if he sold off his piece of land, then he would starve to death. Then there would be a way in which this person could redeem the land, for instance. But he had no money to buy the land back. Then somebody else could redeem the land for him. But there was a stipulation. A friend couldn't do it. A person from another country couldn't do it. Only a blood relative could redeem that piece of land. So what would happen if a person did not have a blood relative? There was a way out. And that was this oath. It was called the covenant of blood, or the oath of blood. You take an animal, split it down, put the two pieces on sides, and then you hold the hand of the person who is able and willing to buy the land back for you, and walk with him across those pieces that were laid on the ground. The meaning is, once you walk across, you both become like those 2 pieces were before one. It also has another meaning, that this oath that you made is a binding oath for life. Once you go across that, you cannot retrace your steps. You cannot go back and say, I made a mistake. No, once you go across those two pieces, you are bonded for life like blood brothers or sisters. And if ever you break your promise, you break that oath, then you will be done to as was done to that animal before when it was one, split in two. In other words, it was a blood covenant. God, when he told Abraham, I will make things come to pass, said, I will walk with you, Abraham, and the whole human race. Hold your hands, and I will walk with you beside the two pieces, and we shall become one. Blood relatives. That is what Jesus did. He became blood relatives with you and me, and then paid the price for the land that was gone. That's your sins and mine. I am ascending to your Father and my Father. Most relationships that we envision between God and humans, it is the humans who must bring their offerings and their sacrifices to God. Isn't that how we look at it? When we want to go and worship God, we bring the offerings. This man's religion is absolutely unique. In this man's religion, it is God who brings the offering for you and me to accept. Entirely different. Most of us think that we should bring a good, acceptable offering to God. In this instance, it is God who makes the offering and brings it to you and me for our acceptance. Does it not make you humble that he would do such a thing? Place you as the most important in his life. Will you accept my offering, he says. You know, when that happens, and we accept it as he shows it, then our response is what he expects. A response of sheer gratitude. That's all. And in that gratitude, there is loyalty. Of course there is. Wouldn't you be loyal to somebody who has, pulled you out of a whirlpool in which you were going to drown? Of course. Similarly here, Christianity is not primarily following a set of rules. Christianity actually is a standing ovation to somebody who has performed so well that you can't help but applaud. That is the picture. And so, this is how I ended my search of those 20 years. If this God was careful to preserve sufficient evidence to address my cold, questioning intellect, that was the previous hours that we spent together, and if he left enough warmth and passion in his portrayal to grip my wandering emotions, then my response is from deep within a place called my heart that now feels safe enough to hang its eternal destiny on this man whose story unfolds and is laid open in this book. I have signed my name because that is how I ended my search. And I leave it to anyone who listens. Do your search. Be honest about it. Take all the evidence that you can possibly bring, lay it side by side, and then make a decision. I believe you will be the better off for that. And if you find something that grips your heart with a passion, then let it grip your heart. Your lives will be rich. I guarantee you that. And I pray and I wish you in your journey of search that you will come to the harbor of fulfillment and find fulfillment, blessings, and peace in your life. I bid you adieu.